And let me introduce our guests, of course, before we dive into the topic. Mr. Trimmel Gomes, a political commentator, all New Yorkers, by the way. Today, Dr. Jonathan Metzl, gun violence expert, and Mr. Charles Glasser, First Amendment lawyer. Thank you all, gentlemen, so very much for coming on the show today. And I assume that our viewers can guess the topic right. Back in the limelight, gun control or gun rights. Let's take a closer look and pick up the debate right after.
A deadly wave of gun violence has shaken America as 4 fatal shootings took place over just one weekend. The most recent attack in Texas saw 2 people killed on Sunday and at least 3 others hospitalized after a shooting at a flea market. In California, the very same day, at least 1 person died and 5 were wounded after a shooting at a church in Orange County, south of Los Angeles. Chicago's mayor enacted a weekend curfew for unaccompanied minors at a city park after a 16-year-old boy was killed there. The shootings, each horrific in their own way, punctuated the weekend's main horror: an 18-year-old male who went to an African-American neighborhood in Buffalo, New York, on Saturday, and, in less than 2 minutes, gunned down 13 people at a grocery store, killing 10. The Buffalo tragedy marks one of the deadliest racist massacres in recent years, renewing the need for scrutiny on internet hate speech. But how can we regulate such extremist views online? And how do we prevent these weapons falling so easily into the wrong hands? Does the inability of authorities, leaders, and politicians to stop this recurring violence not urge a change in the system? Should the US rethink the Second Amendment?
So let's get to it. Should the U.S. rethink the Second Amendment? Gentlemen, you know the rules. You each get 30 seconds to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we pick up the debate after. So, Charles, take the lead.
Well, thank you much. Of course, we're talking about 2 separate questions that do overlap, and that is Second Amendment issues and First Amendment free speech issues and where they intersect. I think we agree on that. And I think that it's fair to say no reasonable person believes that the current situation is acceptable. It just doesn't make sense. The trouble that we have is that we're in 3 buckets, as it were: the social, the political, and the legal. And the answers are somewhere a combination of all 3.
And we will get to all those buckets in a second. Thank you, Charles. Jonathan, your take?
We have a Second Amendment as part of our Constitution. It worked pretty much well for everybody until the mid-1980s, when there was a committee to reinterpret the Second Amendment and really take off all the regulations governing who can own and buy a firearm, where they can carry it. And so the problem isn't the Second Amendment, it's that we are interpreting it so broadly. Since the 1980s, every reasonable gun law has fallen by the wayside, and the Supreme Court is about to make another catastrophic mistake. So the question isn't, should we overturn the Second Amendment? Right. It's that our interpretation is flawed.
Well, not the gun, but the people, not the law, but the people. We're going back to people at the end of the day. Trimmel, last but not least, the floor is yours.
Instead of just rethinking the Second Amendment, it's time for the American people to act. We've been rethinking this at every instance of a mass shooting. As you just reported, there was so many over the weekend, and there's more to come. There could be one right now. What people and the American people and visitors do every day is rethink their movements. They think whether they can go into a crowded area, whether they can go to school, whether they can go to a place of worship and have peace. People are rethinking their lives due to this ongoing threat of gun violence, and it's time for leaders to act.
Right. So, gentlemen, please feel free to interact from this point onwards. You know, both sides of the divide see recent events, or as Trimmel said, every time there's such a tragedy taking place, both sides rather see it as strengthening their point. More guns meaning more danger, and on the flip side of it, more danger necessitates more guns. How do we mend the gaps here, Charles?
Well, if I may, Yeah, if I may, let's start with a couple of facts because they speak to practical solutions such as they may be available. The Department of Justice last year estimated that there are at least 310 million with an M firearms in the United States. And as a matter of policing, as a matter of law, as a matter of practicality, there's no way you're going to scoop them all up. That's not going to happen. It simply will not happen. Fine. It's also worth noting, and I don't think that either of the gentlemen with us would disagree. Look, no constitutional right is absolute. I get it. I think that characterizing recent Supreme Court rulings, which is sort of code for conservative, is a little misleading because, in fact, the court's interpretation at its core of the Second Amendment has not really varied all that much, and state laws that go too far are struck down. And most of I do not own a weapon. I have in the past, but I do not. And I have many friends who do and are responsible gun owners. They're members of the NRA and all that sort of thing. But even they agree that, look, you can't buy a flamethrower, you can't buy an anti-tank missile, and those are reasonable restrictions. I'll even go further and say that most reasonable gun owners believe that there should be safety requirements. Why is owning a gun easier than driving a car? That makes no sense.
Why is that, Charles?
That makes no sense. Pardon?
Why is that, Jonathan? Sorry, wanted to toss the ball into Jonathan's court.
Yeah.
Well, please, I mean, I have to say, I would push back on that a little bit. I live in Tennessee. I'm a professor at Vanderbilt, and I can just tell you, in my home state of Tennessee, we have seen.
I'm a professor at NYU, so hats off. Yeah.
Well,
I'm a professor at
NYU. Cool. I'm not playing the professor card. I'm telling you that the law card in the state that I live in has lowered the age of carry from 21 to 18. It's overturned every single permit requirement. You can basically just go in if you're 18 years old and buy a semi-automatic weapon and then carry it legally. You're not culpable of anything until the minute you pull the trigger and kill somebody. We've seen guns in cars, guns in bikes, parks, guns in every single place you can think of. I live above a bar. You can carry a loaded gun into a bar. And so I don't agree there's any fail-safe on bad laws. And what we see in the data that I research shows that every time you loosen the regulations where people can carry guns in public, you see more shootings. And that's pretty solid data. And let me just finish. And I would just say that there's no stopgap. The more shootings lead to worse laws.
But
Chicago,
yes, please.
A democratic city has extremely restrictive gun laws. We're not even into May yet, or we're halfway through it, and there have already been 204 murders with guns in a city where even thinking about owning a gun is illegal. In my state, actually New Jersey, 1,412 people were murdered in Newark alone, in a state furiously democratic, blue all the way, super restrictive gun laws. That does not work to say that the higher the restriction of laws, the lower the incidence of gun violence. That just the stats and the reality simply do not bear that out.
So Trimmel, what do you say to those facts or this data that Charles just presented?
That's a tired argument that you hear all the time from conservatives as a reason to not have any restrictions on gun control.
Say that.
Yeah. Yes, Trimmel,
I am saying that's an argument that is very frequent. I hear it all the time in the halls at the Capitol in Tallahassee, Florida. Any restrictions or attempt to put restrictions on guns is seen as an erosion to the Second Amendment. It's either all or nothing, and that's how it is pushed. And attempts to curtail that slows the whole process down.
Yeah. So, but isn't there an in between? Is it all or nothing? Really, is a certain degree of regulation cannot hinder the spread of guns in such an irresponsible manner as we were seeing now?
Well, as I started out saying, and I think the other folks agree with me, look, no constitutional right is absolute, and I'm certainly not an absolutist on any of the elements of the Bill of Rights. That being said, you're absolutely correct in saying, as your experience shows in Florida, that this is why I said one of the problems is political. The all or nothing approach does not solve or serve these kids, these adults, these innocent bystanders. The justice system, the all or nothing approach does not work. Now, I spent 14 years working for a man who has spent literally tens of millions of dollars. His name is Mike Bloomberg. You may have heard of him.
Yeah.
And he is one of the most staunch anti-gun proponents, as is his right. He has channeled, like I said, tens of millions of dollars into this. I think, to cut right to the chase, if I may, that if the question isn't so much to rethink the Second Amendment, because you know what, there's a much simpler solution, but no one seems to be willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work, and that is simply a constitutional convention. You can overturn an amendment, but instead of the hard fight, and that is a hard fight because our founding fathers designed the Constitution to be difficult to change. Fair enough.
But Jonathan, maybe the solution is, as we're seeing, perhaps this growing trend to let each state have its own mandate on such crucial moral issues. Let it be abortion, let it be gun control. The two Americas are simply so far apart now that again those moral verdicts seems far-fetched.
Well, that's the system we've had, but that's not the system we're going to have going forward. There's a case about New York gun laws that's in front of the Supreme Court now that's going to overturn 100 years of precedent about state-level gun laws in New York, and it's going to lead to a dramatic increase in gun sales, gun markets, open carry, and so I think that the state system is one that. Thank you, Chuck. I'm talking. And so I would say that the state level issue has really been the détente that we've had in this country, but that's not what the Supreme Court is about to do. It's about to overturn and federalize and overturn blue state gun laws. So again, I think we're in very dramatic terrain here.
Yes, the dramatic is the zeitgeist to an extent. Trimmel, before we take a break, your take on what we've just heard here.
I think it's time for leaders of this country to act and really sit down at the table. There's no more thinking and rethinking. It's just putting these plans in place. We've actually seen our children get killed at the hands of guns, and even our Congress members have been gunned down, and nothing has changed. So what will it take next for them to really take action and put a stop to this?
I want to throw in some data, how gun-related deaths break down in the U.S. Out of a total of 38,355, 14,414 homicides involving guns. Americans' attitude to gun laws, should they be more strict, kept the same, or made less strict? The decline in desire to see them getting more strict among those who wanted them to toughen previously. I find it interesting. And last but not least, gun rights spending versus gun control spending. Charles alluded to that earlier. Well, you've guessed it right. Gun rights spending much more. So let's kickstart another very quick round of 30 seconds each with another question. And my question to you is the Second Amendment, or rather the discourse surrounding it, to an extent the epitome of the U.S., what the U.S. is all about, rather. So maybe giving up the debate is giving up on America. And excuse me for being, flamboyant with my remarks here, Trimmel.
It's not really giving up on America, if I heard the question correctly. It's actually exposing the way America really works. And as mentioned earlier, nothing is absolute. Freedom is not absolute. There are consequences, and when you're owning a gun, there are massive responsibilities. When we talk about free speech, it's with an asterisk, because there are consequences to being able to say what you want. So it's it's really sitting back and holding people to account, and that's the way we go forward in making sure that everyone is safe.
Jonathan, your take?
Gun violence is a common problem for shared humanity. So is racism. We're not just talking about guns right now.
Right.
Every shooting that you've mentioned, the victims were minoritized Americans. The shooting in Buffalo was an act of white supremacy. And so we need to come together as a society to address common problems, and a society that can't come together to address gun violence, but also racism, white supremacy is failing its democratic ideals.
Charles, the floor is yours.
I would say here. Indeed, you're really getting, both of you gentlemen are getting quite to the core of the question. That's twofold. One, what does speech have to do with it? And two, what about this correlation of anti-hate speech laws and the actual incidents? The ADL keeps quite, as you would imagine, keeps quite a bit of data on this. 24% of Western European countries view, they deny the Holocaust. The people deny the Holocaust. And as you both know, Germany, France, Switzerland all have anti-hate speech laws. In the United States, we have no such laws, and yet only 10% of the American public are what we would call Holocaust deniers. The idea that speech equals violence or causes violence is a very disproven, in quite a number of cases, I could cite them for you, disproven idea. So I mean that's just it's a chimera. It's just a false.
So where do
believing it doesn't get us anywhere.
So if we're trying to take both topics and connect them, both speaking about the extent of freedom, where do we put the line, Trimmel?
Where do we put the line as far as freedom? I think we really need to sit down and really put in place, let it be known the consequences to one's actions. And when we see instances of, like, the mass shooting in Buffalo, the treatment of this assailant, this terrorists that went about and did this act, what are the consequences that this person will face to actually stop others from repeating this and not being celebrated, which is actually happening in some circles, those who have the same views and mindset of this individual?
Dr. Metzl?
Did you celebrate Stephen Hodgson? Huh?
Sorry.
Did you?
Yeah.
Did I celebrate Stephen Hodgkinson? Do you even know who he was? Or James Lee? Do you know who he was? James Lee shot up the Discovery Channel, inspired by Al Gore's book. Am I to hold Greta Thunberg responsible for the next Echo Warrior?
No, but we're talking talking about actual cases taking place by actual people. We're talking, again, ramifications that are immediate. Dr. Metzl, is the political climate, especially ahead of midterms, facilitating any change? Both you and Trimmel suggested that there's no need for rethinking, but just actually delivering on the existing thought.
I'll make 3 quick points about that.
Yeah.
First of all, just read the 180-page diatribe by the white supremacist terrorist who was the shooter in Buffalo, and tell me if that rhetoric is linked to any larger ideologies. I mean, very clearly he's reflecting white replacement theory, and that replacement theory has a home on conservative outlets across the country. And so the question is, can you address the tensions of that? Of course, everybody who's espousing that is not going to become a mass shooter, but that theory is creating a lot of racial animus and anti-Black violence. And so number one, of course, is you can't isolate the event without linking it to these bigger theories. Number two, as Charles, I think, will say, the First Amendment is not sacrosanct. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. There's regulations on speech all the time.
Stop right there. That's a misquote.
No,
that's
Charles,
a misquote.
I did not interrupt you. So we regulate speech. We regulate speech all the time, and I think. We read this piece all the time.
It's not the law it's not since Brandenburg v. Ohio, man. Years.
So in other words, anybody can make a threat to somebody else's life, and that's just protected speech.
I would suggest you read Brandenburg again if you haven't already. With all due respect.
You are, not we. You are all well read. That's for sure.
The threat has to be immediate and concurrent and right there. Right there, not some vague idea. There are dozens of these cases where some creep shot a policeman and the family sued the record company because it turned out, Davidson v. Time Warner, if you know, that the guy had a rap record kill the police. Well, you can't hold the rapper responsible for that.
Yeah, Jonathan, please just we stopped you in the middle of the
sorry.
Yeah, no, Chuck is so convincing that I'm having a hard time.
I'm enjoying listening to him too, but I wanted to finish your point.
I understand, yeah.
Yeah, no, but I would just say that's kind of the issue, is that we're not just talking about guns here, we're talking about overt racism and racial animus, and so I just think we have to make a decision.
I'm 100%.
Yeah, we seem to all be on the same page when it comes to this debate. Trimmel, as we're nearing the end, very much related, a bombshell recording today revealed a Twitter top engineer saying Twitter doesn't believe in free speech, saying they're censoring the left but not the right, and obviously that echoes everything we've been discussing before, especially those far right theories paving their way into mainstream. What do you make of this statement?
It's to be heard. It's like, hearing of one person within the organization stating this, and of course it's all surrounding Elon Musk, more so the soon-to-be maybe owner of Twitter, and his views, and whether he understands what free speech is all about. But going back a little bit to the where we are politically and seeing the movements with regards to gun violence, we're seeing, especially in Florida, pushes for having open carry. And when it comes to the intersection of dealing with racism and this issue, open carry does not work for someone that looks like me. When you look at the statistics, a black man having a gun is seen as a threat. So there are issues that we really need to sit down and deal with, to the point made earlier that we need to really look at the racial impact and trying to figure out ways to curb this ongoing threat of violence.
I'm saying it with great sadness. We have to wrap up the debate now. Charles, Trimmel, and Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on the show.